Okay.
All right. So, Prime Minister.
Chair, clearly gun violence is terrible, but so is the fact that there is a need for the most vulnerable to be able to defend themselves, especially when when women are and non-male individuals are disproportionately victims of gun violence, of domestic violence, of things that put their life at risk and impose a chilling effect onto them so that they can never live their lives in absence of fear. We think that only side government is able to effectively balance these rights and balance these interests. And we think that the policy where non-male individuals are actually able to bear arms is the most effective one to protect individuals under status quo. What do we stand for? We think firstly that we would allow non-male individuals, meaning not just women, but also trans individuals as well, we would allow them to carry arms. Secondly, what would this process of being able to get a gun look like? We would think that this would be the most transparent process possible. So they can't push to us some idea of like status quo being like not being able to delineate, because I think Democrats have currently proposed reforms such as having background checks, having gun licenses afforded to individuals who have demonstrated the mental capacity to use these guns, like to be able to like rationalize whether violence should be used or not. We think that they'll be sold in some areas only, as opposed to areas like Walmart, for example. Everything will be an extremely transparent process. And if you commit a crime, if you use a gun, obviously we would put you in jail. Obviously we would take that gun away from you. What do we think the burden that we have to prove is? We think that policies have to be nuanced, they have to be clear cut, and they have to delineate between rights and different actors. We think that all sides of the debate have to engage within that gray area. And we think that we don't have to prove that all gun violence is gone, but rather who best minimizes violence as a whole and best protects individuals on the ground. Two main arguments then. Firstly, why this policy compared to status quo eradicates gun violence, and secondly, why this allows women to escape the confines of fear and properly protect themselves for the first time. Into my first argument, I think it's just real life data and just facts that gun violence and mass shootings are just a male problem. We point you to the fact that out of 100 mass shootings in a year that happened, 98 of these individuals were male. We point you to the fact that Second Amendment protesters are overwhelmingly male, that 50% of all men in the United States own a gun. Why exactly is this? We don't think it's just a problem that exists in the data, but rather the structural problem that can only be eradicated at the point in which we restrict the ability of male individuals to bear arms. The first reason is toxic masculinity. We think that masculinity is often associated with expectations of aggression. And even in the most liberal of societies, for example, the United States, the perception that aggression is important and that this is intrinsically linked towards gun ownership, where things like hunting, things like shooting at the shooting range are hobbies that are glorified within young children. I think this is a mindset that is indoctrinated into children and male individuals from a very, very young age. I think that ultimately toxic masculinity means that there is not only an expectation of, not only is it okay for a man to carry a gun, but it's also expected that he do so, and that it's okay that he engage in some form of violence, because it's always things like boys will be boys, or that boys are expected to be more violent. The second thing we want to say is just a biological tendency for mental illness to manifest more in men, and this often manifests in more aggressive forms. The third thing we would say is that the stereotype of shooters currently, corresponding with the data we've told you about, is that these shooters are men. I think oftentimes things like radical platforms, things like 4chan, things like Reddit boards, tend to not only accept this fact, but tend to encourage men to carry out shootings, for example, to further their ideas or to further their manifestos. I think oftentimes these radical circles are misogynist, which is to say that they don't believe that women should be able to do these things, right? We point to, for example, the incel boards that were crucial in like pushing a lot of white nationalist individuals to commit gun violence. I think oftentimes individuals tend to internalize, firstly, what the stereotype of a shooter looks like, and then therefore they begin to see it as okay to commit a shooting. But secondly, I think women also, even though they may have radical thoughts and ideologies, they do not tend to identify themselves with the individuals they see within the statistics. All this is a vicious circle that compounds. That means that men are overwhelmingly and disproportionately, almost exclusively, the perpetrators of gun violence. Through this policy, we're able to essentially eradicate gun violence. We of course, we will concede that there will be some instances, but in my second argument, I'll tell you why ultimately this weighs out over it. Into my second argument then, how this allows women to escape the confines of fear and finally protect themselves properly. the first thing we want to say is that women need, and women and non-male individuals just need protection. I think this is something that's already recognized in precedents. For example, how we push women to get self-defense classes, or we push them to carry pepper spray, because we understand that they live in a world that is intrinsically dangerous to them. We say firstly that because of misogynist and rape culture that exclusively targets women, this means that women are more vulnerable to attacks. For example, and additionally, the discrimination towards trans individuals means that the average lifespan for a trans woman is 27 years old. I think that's absolutely abhorrent, and there needs to be something done. So individuals need something to protect them, as well as the fact that women are just biologically weaker and oftentimes can be overpowered by men. This is a generalization, so obviously it doesn't apply in every case, but because women are especially vulnerable, and especially in developing countries, for example, are seen as able to be preyed upon, there needs to be some form of protection. Secondly, why other forms of protection are inadequate. We see that the physical asymmetry of power means that even if you have something like a pepper spray, even if you have something like a knife, this is never going to be enough to protect yourself for a few reasons. Firstly, because oftentimes the things that are legal under status quo require you to be at close range with your attacker, with your perpetrator. And I think oftentimes that is too late for you to act, or you are too scared to act, or even if you choose to, you can easily be overpowered by that individual. Secondly, there are uncertain outcomes to these things. So even if you have a knife, the other person might have a knife as well. So then it becomes who is stronger. And oftentimes the woman is at a disadvantage, not only because she is physically weaker, but because she is told that she is physically weaker, because she is unable to protect herself in that way. But most importantly, we don't think that you even have to shoot a gun to be able to get these outcomes. The mere possession of a gun is the only weapon that is actually able to neutralize the threat from the get-go, to be able to scare men off. Because currently, society frowns upon the women possessing guns. Therefore, most women don't. And as opposed to most men under status quo actually do. At the point at which women actually have this power that is able to balance the asymmetry of power and the asymmetry of power, this means that the mere possession of a gun stops these sorts of domestic violence and violence towards women and trans individuals from being committed in the first place. I think this is extremely important. Because currently women under status quo, from my own experience, it is extremely hard to walk somewhere at night alone. You often feel threatened. You often feel scared from pursuing economic opportunities because you're unsure whether that is a safe working environment that you can go to. This chilling effect is extremely detrimental to women across the globe. We see that only the possession of a gun is able to finally be the sort of leverage and be the sort of power that is able to allow them to carry out their lives in normalcy, for them to be able to feel safe within the presence of other men because they know that they're able to defend themselves, because they know that men will not attack them for fear of getting shot. I think we need to balance rights. And I think that this policy does that most effectively. If you believe in protecting women, if you believe in eradicating gun violence, go beside opening government.
All right. Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech. Let's now move on to the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep. Can hear you.
Right from the get-go, the first speaker of opening government already made the mistake of homogenizing male individuals and non-male individuals. We don't think that is right, and I'll be telling you more in my frame later on. This debate is not about the right to bear arms, so to spend time talking about the harms and pros of a gun would be a waste of time. Rather, this debate is about who should have the right to bear arms. Therefore, our policy. Our policy is that in order to bear arms, you should be able to apply for a license with proper background checks done by the government. Secondly, we would be restricting arms that people are allowed to possess, just like New Zealand did. However, if these people with the license, they inflict unnecessary abuse on other people other than self-defense, their license will be immediately revoked. And of course, our side will also be supporting public education and empowerment. Before we move on to talk about how our case actually is, I'll be talking about what the opening government talked about with two contentions. Firstly, I will be tackling their entire point on allowing women to defend themselves, and secondly, on how their side eradicates gun violence. So firstly, on allowing women to defend themselves, throughout their entire point, they told us that women are in perpetual danger, which is why they always take self-defense classes, which is why they always take along a pepper spray with them. However, we are not denying them the right to self-defense, but it does not justify why you can do the same for any other people. And women currently do have the right to bear arms, so I don't see how on your side your point actually stands when women are still being stifled by influence within society. However,
Point.
they're not solving the problem, right? No, thank you. Giving a woman a gun and getting rid of a man's gun does not mean that the man cannot rape her or get rid of any misogynistic thinking. So their analysis does not stand. Their entire point relies on the assumption that they are able to change the psychological thinking that every misogynistic man has in our today's society. But let's take them at their best case scenario, right? Even if they were to finally able to defend themselves with the right to bear arms, they'll only be looked down society. They will only be looked down by society more because now it is women inflicting the harm. And even like, oh, men will get scared because they are bearing arms. I don't think that kind of rebuttal stands because men are always constantly looking down on women. Furthermore, there are many other ways to empower women to defend themselves, which is why governments are legislating laws to protect these women further, as seen in highly misogynistic countries like South Korea and Japan. So moving on to the second contention on how their side is saying they're going to eradicate.
Point information.
No, thank you. However, we have to recognize it's not about the current data. We are debating on the a priori benefit of the right to bear arms for future dangers. We have to recognize that shootings are unpredictable. So the person who is initiating this gun violence and who is being abused by that right is also unpredictable. So whatever data they give you about how male are the ones initiating the violence in the first place, it does not stand. So let's continue. They also told us that those who are initiating, yes, sir.
You talked about how mass shootings are unpredictable, but can you explain how does gun shootings in the United States of America by men, as proven by speaker number one as by the Prime Minister, can you justify that, please?
Yes, thank you. I will be explaining why we cannot homogenize these sorts of people later. Please wait. So they also told us how the male shooters are overwhelmingly male. So when we give them the right to bear arms, there's not an expectation for him to do so, and it's okay for them to do so. However, this sort of link does not even stand because just because like someone bears a gun means that it is okay to start shootings. This is very ridiculous. But they also told us that males are likely to initiate gun violence because illness in men is able to manifest worse. However, mental illness does not discriminate, and so should you. Therefore, we should not disregard that. Moving on to my frame, right? Moving on to the frame, we believe that the right to bear arms, it also leads to the right to self-defense, assuming that it is already legal for an individual to do so in present state, according to today's motion. However, we have to realize that the real problem in today's debate is the faulty way of how we give these arms to people within society, which is why we are taking part in today's debate. We cannot homogenize non-male individuals and male individuals because there are many subgroups within male individuals who face discrimination as well, such as George Floyd and Hispanics. On the other hand, we cannot homogenize non-male individuals because everyone has a risk of abusing their rights to arm. Government will argue based on the scale of harm, but in the context of today's debate, it is more of who is getting abused. Abuse is still abuse, and in order to win today's debate, both government and opposition has to prove that the right to bear arms is able to better protect those owning them. Leading me to my first point, right? Self-defense is an intrinsic human right that should be applicable to all human beings. No, thank you. Because what defines you as a human is your ability to use freedom and extend it in the form of actions in terms of what you want to do, i.e. the agency that you have in a society. Positive freedom is needed by all individuals to exercise identity and to feel human. This is especially prominent, no thank you, in societies that are Western liberal democracies like the US. However, this is hindered and significantly diminished when you are unable to protect yourself, and therefore you are left vulnerable to what other people can do to you, which could lead to dehumanization, which is especially meaning to individuals, no thank you, to individuals throughout to all society, no matter who they are, right? So let's simple illustration, right? If only non-male individuals have the right to bear arms, what this means is that now those who are being abused by those arms are literally defenseless. However, on the comparative, on our side, when both sides have the right to bear arms, what this means is that they are both able to defend their own selves, rather than, which is even if like abuse of arms does take place, the harm that the scale of harm that is in this situation is far less than when only one party has the right to bear arms. This is not exclusive to any person, right? Which is why people deem torturing criminals to be bad. What is the implication of this? When we don't allow a certain group of people within society to not have the right to arms, what this means is that we are blocking people out to defend themselves. We're pitching those with arms against who doesn't. What this means that on side government, they're making male individuals far more vulnerable than they actually are. We cannot underestimate the amount of harm that male individuals are facing today. Sure, non-male individuals are facing harm, but what society should, but the goal of society is to actually move to a better world where people are far better protected. Very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you, Leader of Opposition. Let's move on to the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Give me a minute, yeah?
Sure, whenever you're ready. Hold on. Hello? Yes? Okay, I'm back whenever you're ready.
Okay. Chair, this debate cannot be about those few men or those few not male individuals who face harm. In every policy that the government passes, there might be gray areas, but there will be some generalizations in a policy. We cannot account for the one or two minorities who might be in some way privileged or who might not face harm. We need to recognize the overall net harm that most minorities face or that most victims face when accounting for policies, and we think that there's an overwhelming harm within society that non-male individuals face. Additionally, they have been victims in society for the longest time, and we think this is due reparation for all the harm and fear that they have internalized. Moving on to responses. The first thing they say is that women do have the right to bear arms in society today, and hence we shouldn't give them an additional privilege. Recognize we've already told you how women internalize the fact that there's a stereotype when it comes to bearing arms. Men usually are seen to be more strong. Men usually are seen to be more deserving of these things and know how to use this apparatus. Oftentimes, men feel like because they're more strong biologically, they deserve and they are able to use those arms. Women oftentimes internalize fear when it comes to these things, and oftentimes do not have the courage to bear arms. Plus, it's just anti any stereotype against women and traditional gender roles. So we think statistically in a lot of countries, even in the US, there's just an overwhelming statistic or percentage of men who bear arms. But also, this just isn't only about bearing arms. When it comes to things like domestic abuse in countries where bearing arms isn't a thing, we still think women are disproportionately harmed, and they have not responded to that. Secondly, they say just because a woman has a gun doesn't mean that a man cannot rape her. Although this might be slightly true, recognize it's a scale, and we severely mitigate harms that women face because there's always a gun is one of the most powerful things someone can own, and it's something that doesn't require physical strength. Rather, it's a mechanism that ultimately means a lot of harm, and hence it's one of the best tools that we can equip a woman with, because recognize other things like pepper spray, etc., or a knife, etc., just aren't enough to counter the strength that a lot of men have in these situations. Thirdly, they say laws are there to protect themselves. Firstly, in Malaysia, where we are considerably quite liberal in our policies. Even though we're like a developing country, we're on a scale a little bit more liberal than a lot of other countries. We still do not have that a proper sexual harassment bill drafted. Marital rape is still not illegal. There's just so much of absence when it comes to proper laws in a lot of countries where rights are already seem to be growing. Recognize that the mere inequality within lobbying systems, where there's a mass overflow of men within these systems and mass power imbalance because women just don't have enough positions of power in these spaces, already means laws are not inapt to cater to all the problems women face. Yes, there's a growing change, but this is an immediate problem that needs an immediate solution. We still think that we can't wait for laws to be perfect before women get protection. But also, laws are very reactionary, or other mechanisms are extremely reactionary. So things like the police coming in to intervene, or things like other government actors or bodies are reactionary to the crime. The crime oftentimes already happens. Women are already traumatized. We think we need a proactive policy where women have a mechanism to protect themselves. All other mechanisms have systematically failed, which is why we still see rise of domestic abuse, domestic violence, and we simply don't have a mechanism to cater to that. We think this is a policy that caters to them. They then say mental illness does not discriminate based on gender, and that women also have mental illness. But we didn't talk about mental illness specifically. We said mental illness related to toxic masculinity, and recognize this is a problem within men, and they oftentimes internalize that hypermasculinity that causes them mental illness in this area, and that is why they tend to go berserk when it comes to shootings, etc. The last thing they say is that there's also non-male individuals who are victims, etc., like George Floyd, etc. Firstly, this is a completely different issue when it comes to police brutality. We have other laws to cater to that, but recognize in minority communities like the African American community, there's an overwhelming a problem when it comes to domestic abuse. Men who oftentimes get brutalized in society take it out or vent it out on their wives, and there's an overwhelming problem when it comes to especially African American areas or African American communities. We think women are severely underprotected, and we can't account for those one or two men who might be victims. It has to be a general policy that caters, because the statistics overwhelmingly show that women are victims. But lastly, let me just tell you why this policy should not be extended to men, and why men overwhelmingly have power. Firstly, we think that men are less likely to be harmed simply because the narrative that men are stronger. There's an overwhelming power imbalance between men and women. Women have internalized the fact for decades that men are in a fight. Men will always win. Men are biologically stronger, even if this might not be true. A lot of women have internalized the fact that they will never be able to win over a man. It has taken decades to correct itself, and a lot of times women still believe this even today. Hence, we think that in that fight, men have severely more power and women oftentimes feel weaker, which is why this somewhat corrects the power imbalance, and we shouldn't extend this policy to men. If not, it's just overwhelming power when it comes to one gender. Secondly, we think that there's too much political capital in the hands of men. Even within developing countries, women tend to be economically dependent on men, so they tend to depend on them for their livelihoods. Men are economically stronger, and hence women oftentimes are more subservient to them. But this also means men have more political or economic capital when it comes to hiring lawyers or getting themselves justice, or when it comes to acting within the situations. Men are oftentimes, the money they have means that they are more powerful, and women oftentimes, because of their lack of economic sustainability and capital, they also lack things. But lastly, we already told you how laws are skewed towards one gender, and hence the power to lobby is also lacking. But but can I just say that for decades, women have been oppressed. Women have been in fear. One of the reasons why women have not been able to garner economic sustainability is because they fear that they will be harmed on the streets, or they can't travel alone. All these things means women have been oppressed for years, and we think this is the only fair reparation method, because all other things have failed. This means we can finally counter in some way the fears and oppression that women have faced through gender-based violence, and we think this is the only fair mechanism. Proud to propose.
Right. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Let's move on to the Deputy Leader of Opposition. You're here.
Am I audible?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Also, just in case I had some connection problems, so if I do not realize that my mic has been disconnected, it will help if someone would say it.
All right, I'll let you know.
Thank you. The case we are hearing from OG today is simply hyper-feminist. They try to frame women as these vulnerable groups. We're not denying that women are vulnerable. We are female ourselves and we understand the prejudices against us. But that does not mean you completely reverse the power asymmetry and by saying that this will somehow help women and this will equalize the playing field for women as a whole. Because understand, as much as men have done something wrong, not all men are homogenous, not all men are the same, not all men are privileged, and everyone has the intrinsic right to defend themselves. There are two main clashes that I will be tackling today. First of all, who makes it better, not just for women, but for minority groups as a whole. Second of all, who actually takes the moral high ground and is principally consistent. So on to my first clash on who makes it better for minority groups. We are quite disappointed that what OG brought up only narrows the debate to non-male individuals who happen to be women. I think that the spectrum of people who fall under non-male individuals are significantly diverse because this also includes people from the LGBT community. But given that they already told about women and talked about how women are able to defend themselves when they are given the right to a gun and men are not, we tell you that this makes it far worse on their side because they do not change the fundamental perception. In fact, they make it worse because now people, and men especially, who initially hate women are now going to hate women more because of this woman who exists in society. I do not have the ability to hold a gun while she does. It also increases the fear
Point of
towards women
information.
because now only women who no thank you. Because now only women are able to hold a gun, and therefore it makes people fear women, and this is very bad because it does not change the fundamental perception which they say have been ingrained in society for very long. So instead, this actually worsens the power imbalance because now females have far less power in order to do actions and in order to enact change in society because of the worsening perception that is clinging onto them. Second of all, they do not understand what's the real problem behind this whole all the arguments that they brought about. It's not just that women have no means in order to defend themselves, but rather it's because of the systemic problems in society. This is where we're going to tell you that it's not the only solution on OG to allow women to be the only ones to bear rights, to bear guns. This is because there are many other ways, like having powerful women in office, right, where they are able to also regulate policies with regards to gun violence, like how Jacinda Ardern was able to limit the kinds of guns that people are able to hold. And therefore, we tell you that it's fundamentally misleading for them to say have to allow women to be the only ones who hold guns. We think that fundamentally it's also very dangerous to assume that all women are also homogenous and that all women do not have the risk of doing something bad. And I'll explain that more in my second clash later. Understand that because they have continued to homogenize and narrow this debate to only women, they also significantly harm other individuals like LGBT individuals and minority males because these are people who also, by their principle, will be stripped of the right to defend themselves. Now on to my second clash on who actually has the moral high ground and who is actually more principally consistent. Their only line of analysis, if we were to boil it down, was that women face the propensity for abuse and therefore they deserve the right to protect themselves. We tell you that their principle is actually our principle, but even better. But our principle is far better. This is because they assume that on their side, only women are facing the risk and that risks are only designated to certain individuals. We tell you that this is largely unfalse because each individual faces a risk. Even if I'm a white man, I still face the risk of people robbing me on the streets at night. Therefore, in principle, OG is significantly contradictory because they are saying that in principle, a black man does not have the right to defend themselves, even though he might get mobbed, even though a police officer may cling him down and actually falsely arrest him. We tell you that on our side because every single individual faces a certain risk in order to face abuse by other individuals. This means that we on our side, where we allow every single person to have the right to defend themselves, we are the ones who are getting the moral high ground. We tell that it's significantly harmful when on their side, they're by principle going to push a man who's going to get robbed by a mob of women, even if it's extreme, they will allow it for these women to shoot a gun at this man, even though this man has no defenses. We tell that also they are principally far off when they try to quantify and designate abuse, because that in society many groups face abuse and many groups face problems. So therefore, they have not justified why only a particular group is able to earn the right to defend their lives and to defend their identity. No. Now on to my case about how on their side they actually worsened the whole situation for female empowerment as a whole. This is where I'm going to talk about how toxic masculinity actually happens on their side instead. Because when the government tells you that males shouldn't be holding guns, but instead should be given to non-male individuals, this implies that all males are dangerous and therefore they are being stripped away from the right to bear arms. We tell you that there are many problems that males also face, not just black males, but also there's a significant number of males who get raped every single day. But the problem is we do not hear about it because everybody only thinks with how females are the ones who are facing the bulk of the abuse. That's why we tell you that it's a very covert and subliminal messaging that you're telling that all males are inherently violent. And this shuts out the ability for people to cast light on more important problems, or problems that are also important, like male rape. Because these are people who have been dehumanized and also deserve to have their voices heard. And we tell you that this is significantly worse for females, paradoxically. No. This is because when women are the ones who are being said that they should be protected, this means that it also shuts out future critical mass for the feminist movement. Given my earlier analysis on how males, according to OG, are predominantly think themselves to be more superior as compared to females, this is where when women are given the only right by the government in order to bear arms, this means that these males will think that they are not part of the whole feminist movement, because females are now taking matters into their own hands. They're not giving me the right to defend myself as well. And therefore, this worsens the empowerment for females as a whole, because what OG is ultimately fighting for is that we should remove the power from men and give it all to women. We tell you what's far better is that everyone should be treated equally, and what we should be fighting for is where men are also not going to be shut up from the whole female movement. For all these reasons, because we've shown you why we subsume OG's case and why we're far better principally, we take this.
All right, thank you, Yellow. Let's move on to the closing houses with the member of government. Here.
Good evening, esteemed judge, fellow teammates, and team opposition. As we all know our motion for today, first of all, I would like to start off with some refutations. First of all, Speaker 1 from opposition came and started and told us about how people, they should have stricter laws and regulations in the country, and there should be stricter ways on how people can apply for the arms license or the gun license, and how there should be background checks on the people trying to get arms. While they do not understand, in many countries around the world, strict gun laws do already exist, and this already does exist, and there is clear investigations taking place, and there are clear records in place. So this clearly does not. This clearly tells us that they have not done significant amount of background about which countries have what kind of gun laws and how they're monitored, etc. Second of all, they spoke about how getting guns might change the psychological mind of people in the society. Well, my team clearly kept speaking about how equality should be promoted, and this is to make sure that no one in the community feels left out, because significant amount of women in the society have been facing injustice, and we believe that guns should be given to women also, so that they creates a sense of equality. And I would like to reinforce this thing that we're living in the 21st century and not in the 18th century, where women should be treated less than men or the other way around. It should be equal. And second of all, they also spoke about how there is a risk of abuse if we give arms to women. However, there is already a risk of abuse from the men's side of also. There's always a risk of any decision. There are advantages and disadvantages of the decision. While they do not take into consideration such factors, they keep telling us about how men might feel left out, etc. But this is to create inequality, and now women are being left out. our aim is not to promote feminism. Our aim is to promote equality, which they're clearly not understanding. Second of all, moving on to speaker 2 from team opposition. They kept speaking about how we're promoting hyper-feminist, etc., while we clearly remake sure that we are promoting equality and not hyper-feminist, etc. And they also clearly spoke about how there's prejudice against women, which we clearly agree to. There is prejudice against women. That's why we believe that arms should be given to them, and there should be a sense of equality in the region and the country. And they also spoke about how women have far less power than men, which is clearly again supporting our side, telling us that they are treated inequally. That's why there should be no POIs right now. They also spoke about how women are being treated unequally, and this is clearly our point, telling us that they're being treated unequally. That's why they should be given arms to stand up for their rights, and there should be it should make sure that no one's left out in the community. Second of all, they also spoke about how they will also keep changing the motion, and they kept thinking that if women are given guns, men's guns would be taken away. Well, they've clearly not understood the motion. Guns would exist for both men and women mainly. And they also spoke about how feminist movements are on the rise. Well, this is not the case. Equality movements are on the rise and not feminist movements, which they clearly do not understand. And they also spoke about how the power for men may be removed. The power for men won't be removed. The power for women will increase. It'll be equal. It'll be a 50-50 ratio to make sure no one feels left out. And there are so many activities happening against women. This would be reduced. There would be a significant less amount of chance that such activities could take place. And we would also like to reaffirm that this would create a sense of threat that women can also stand up for their rights, and hence many people might be demotivated to do such unruly tasks, etc., which are taking place currently in the society where there are barely any guns given to women. Now I would like to reaffirm my team's case. So my Deputy Prime Minister spoke about how there are my Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister mainly spoke about the limitations of pepper spray, which is, again, we support this point because currently self-defense techniques such as karate, etc. do exist. But when a person standing with a gun on your head, you can't do karate, and significantly such pepper spray activities, etc. are not very efficient in such times of crisis. So we believe that, again, there should be inequality. And our Deputy Prime Minister also spoke about how there are absence of laws and against women, because many times the justice system takes a number of years to serve for the women. And he also spoke about how there are reactions to the crime. For example, today if a crime occurs, the police is called an hour later. But while the incident is happening, no justice is being served to the woman. And they also spoke about the proactive policies and also the rise in domestic violence, which I would like to add upon. There is a rise in domestic violence happening against women. That's why again and again we are saying we want to promote equality and not hyper feminist movements, etc. It's to promote equality and make sure that everyone has arms. This is only the whole and sole purpose is self-defense. And already in all countries around the world, if you misuse arms, your gun license is taken away. So that factor already does exist, and we would like to reaffirm this factor. So if abuse of power is done, the gun license has all the right to be taken away. And there's a rise in domestic violence. We would not like this domestic violence to increase. There should be a sense of, there should be reduced violence against women or any minority in the community. With all these points, I strongly believe the motion is in our favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Government. Let's start the closing opposition house with Member of Opposition. Here. Sorry, do you say something?
I was just going to start my timer. Wait.
Oh, all right.
Can I start?
Anytime.
Okay, now. Good afternoon, esteemed judge, my fellow teammates, side opposition in the audience. As member of opposition, I strongly believe, I strongly go against the motion that non-male people should be allowed to have guns only. Now, before moving on to my points, I would like to start with a few refutations. Firstly, pointing out a flaw in what the opening government proposes. The opening government states that there will be a background check and only non-male people, including transgender people, will be allowed to have guns. They clearly did not state what they should do with the guns they own, like whether they should lock it up in a safe or whether they should actually keep it with them at all times. And if women actually keep guns with themselves at all time, then there is a high chance that the guns will be stolen, and then crimes will still be committed. So basically, on their side, there will still be crime. The proposition side also fails to understand that the reason gun crime occur is due to stolen guns. No, thank you. I'll take your POI later. Then they constantly talk about that women are disadvantaged and that they should have more self-defense. But how is it equality if women or non-male people, including transgender people, are allowed to own guns while men are not allowed to? Don't you think that men will start fearing for their lives because they have no method of self-defense? Even though you talk about how men are physically stronger than women, what makes you think that a fist or a raw strength will win against a weapon which can easily kill in 1 second? Yes?
When did we ever mention that the guns from men will be taken away or their power will be reduced?
That is exactly what your motion says, and that is exactly what closing government has misunderstood. Closing government kept on talking about how they are promoting equality, and their side does not mean that men will have their guns taken away. But the motion explicitly states that only non-male people, basically men, only non-male people will be allowed to own guns, meaning men will not be allowed to own guns, and that is what their side is proposed, and that's what closing government has gone completely wrong in. Another point the opening government have talked about is the men are economically and financially stronger, and hence women should be allowed to own guns, except that point is completely irrelevant and is not related to the motion and does not make any sense at all. Then closing government, as I already mentioned, have completely got this motion wrong. They want if they want gun violence to stop, then no guns should be allowed. No one should actually own guns. If you truly want equality, then either everyone should own guns or no one should own guns. Not that women or trans people are allowed to own guns and men are not allowed to own guns. Another point the government side brought up is that since around 98% of mass shootings are caused by men, then this will reduce the crime rate. However, the reason why their stance is ineffective, because if suddenly all men are not allowed to own guns, then the 100% of mass shootings will be caused by women. So what does this mean? There will be a call for men to own guns, and basically this entire motion will be a merry-go-round if we side with proposition.
Point.
Now, yes?
So your side has been continuously saying that this policy is like homogenizing people and that it's not all men, right? But if you screen people for mental illness, you're homogenizing those individuals as not being capable to bear arms. So every policy essentially takes into account the harm that is going to be incurred. We gave you statistics. Why is that not enough to ban guns for men?
Okay, so this is what our closing government will solve. Your question is that people with mental illnesses are most likely men, and that's why men should not be allowed to own guns while women should be allowed to own guns. So that is what our side is stating, is that no one should be allowed to own guns. Basically, guns should be made illegal, and that no one should be allowed to own guns. Due to this, gun violence will decrease significantly.
UI?
No, thank you. So what does our side believe? Our side believes that everyone, that no one should be allowed to own guns, and so we solve the problem of inequality, and at the same time we solve the problem of gun violence. Now, what are our points? Our points are that no one will feel safe, or that men will not feel safe. Why will they not feel safe? Because they are unarmed. they cannot defend against themselves. There are cases where women are become increasingly violent
POI.
against men. So if they use the gun against men, if they shoot men, men have no means to defend against themselves, and suddenly everyone will fear women,
UI,
and everyone will again call for men to be allowed to use
UI,
guns. So basically, this motion will be a
UI.
merry-go-round, which we are stopping, and just saying that no one should be allowed to own guns. Also,
UI.
everyone deserves to protect themselves, including no. Yes.
When you keep saying that guns will be made illegal, don't you take into consideration the black markets that will rise?
Yes, but the number of people that will buy guns from the black market will definitely be less than the number of people who will buy guns if guns were to be made legal.
You've not answered my question clearly.
Okay, no, your question was that that wouldn't there be a black market? I already mentioned that less people will buy guns from the black market if guns are made illegal than the number of people that will buy guns if guns are to be made legal. So why does closing opposition win the case? Closing opposition wins the case because we propose that no one should be allowed to own guns, significantly reducing gun violence, and at the same time we are promoting equality because in our case no one is allowed to use guns. In government's case, women and trans people are allowed to own guns, while men are not allowed to own guns, meaning that women actually have an advantage over men, and that 100% of gun crimes will be caused by women, and at the same time, uh, men will not have a way to defend themselves. With all these points, I strongly believe that closing opposition has won the debate.
Right, thank you, member of opposition. I'd like to remind people that to wait at least 15 seconds between asking POIs if the speaker has rejected your POI. And secondly, not to engage in a conversation with the speaker on the floor. Once you ask the question and the speaker answered it, you can no longer say anything else unless the speaker accepts the second POI. I've asked CG like 3 times, like stop harassing the previous speaker, and because they've not listened to this, CG will no longer be allowed to ask POI to the last speaker of the house. Right, Garflip, whenever you're ready.
I'm audible?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning, esteemed judge and fellow debaters. Now, without wasting any time, let's go into the refutations that have.
Bro, I think you muted yourself.
Sorry. Let's go into the refut. Can you hear me now?
No. Would you like to restart your speech?
Yeah, I will.
All right.
Good morning, esteemed judicator and fellow debaters. Now, without wasting any time, let's jump into the refutations to the points presented by team opposition. Now, I'll be going speaker by speaker. Now, when speaker number 1 comes in from team opposition, she says that men will start hating more. To the hate word of men will increase towards the women, and again, that was a claim. She did not explain why, and that was a very generalized and vague opinion. Secondly, team opposition, two of the speakers talked about the LGBTQ community, how they will be getting their guns and they won't be getting their guns, and then speakers 3 came in from opposition, from closing opposition, and talked about giving guns to the government. So the speakers of team opposition are completely contradicting their own points. Now, speaker 3 from team opposition also talked about guns being stolen, but let's analyze this. When women have guns, they are more they will be more responsible, and in team opposition's world, each and every person will have a gun, which will lead to open fire shootings in terms of a tiny conflict. And then speaker number 3 also talked about how no one will be owning guns, but team opening opposition clearly stated that everyone should be allowed to own their guns, which completely contradicts the model of the opposition and makes no sense whatsoever. Now, he also talked about if a woman and other people and other genders other than the males are given guns, all of the shootings there will be 100% shootings by them. But let's think of this in a mathematical way, right? um 96 96% of shootings by males and 4% shootings by females in in the example my prime minister gave of 96 shootings by men and only 4 by women. Now 4 shootings will be the 100% now, which is way lesser than the other 96 shootings.
Point of information.
No, thank you. They also thought my third speaker also gave a POI asking how this will lead to a rise in the black market, and opposition speaker 3 did not give enough answer to our POI. And what we believe is that once you do not once
Information.
no thank you this will lead to a rise in the black market, because it will be way easier to buy guns, and because you will not need any license to buy guns from the black market, which will lead to a high increase in number of the guns, which clearly state that this will impact their model too. Now, team opposition has also spoken about how men daily get raped, but
Point of information.
no thank you, did they analyze the fact that around the world every day at least 4 women are raped? 4 women. And about men getting raped, they give no examples or no evidence whatsoever. Now, saving each and every day 4 women from getting raped, if these rape cases are decreased, the molesting cases are decreased, the kidnappings are decreased, don't you think it is the right thing to do to give to the people who are weaker in terms of strength in the society to defend themselves, and the people who have been causing harm for so long in the past should be stripped of their rights? Now let's talk about the impact of our model. The impact of our model will lead to lesser inequality around the world, and around the world, as women will now be as strong as men if you look at it theoretically. And we never said that men couldn't own pepper sprays and walk around. Now let's talk about this. There will be less, if women in our world, if women own guns, there will be lesser rapes around the world, lesser molesting cases, lesser kidnappings around the world. Don't you think that this is such a good policy stated by team government? Now, another impact of this will be lesser gang violence around the world. Let's take an example of the only 3 countries in the world that legally allow civilians to own their guns, which is Guatemala, Mexico, and United States of America. And these are also the same countries that have the most amount of gang violence around the world, leading to at least 300,000 people
Point of information.
year due to gang violence. Yes.
You talked about those 3 countries legalizing guns, and then and said that how they have the most gang violence. Won't our model help, saying that no one, if no one is allowed to have guns, there'll be less gun violence?
Exactly my point. Okay, exactly my point. The first speaker from team opposition came up and said that everyone should be able to have the right to bear guns, but the closing opposition came in and said that nobody should have guns, again, as I already stated in the refutations of mine, which completely contradicts your whole debate. Now, as I was talking about lesser gang violence around the world, let this be known that in all of these gangs, like MS-13, Crips, Bloods, around this Northern American continent, at least 98.3% of the people in the gangs are men. And now once these men do not have their guns anymore, there will be such lesser gang violence, lesser people will be dying due to gang violence, and lesser people will be prone to all of this gang violence. Now let's talk about the stakeholders. The stakeholders in our debate so far have been the males who cannot carry any more guns. This will mean that people, women and men, will now have equal rights in the society. And finally, to end the debate, I would like to compare two different worlds: team government and team opposition. In team government world, which is a better world where women responsibly know how to use the right they have, rather than in team opposition's world, where which was unclear to team government. As team opposition first stated, everyone should get guns, and then they stated nobody should get guns. Now, in both of these worlds, there will be a lot of violence inflicted. And with all these points, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Government Whip, for that speech. Let's move on to the last speech of this debate. Op Whip. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, let me just start my timer. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. Now, today, as the last speaker of this debate, I would like to go against the motion that non-male individuals should be given the right to bear arms. Now, I would like to start off with the refutations. Now, in the other side, the opening government says that there will be background checks and people will be given the guns. However, they never stated what will be done with the guns and where and when they should be used. They kept talking about how women need more self-defense and need more equality, whereas they are actually not causing this when the women are being given arms, whereas the men are not allowed to bear guns. But as the closing government said, they will be given pepper spray, which is clearly, according to the closing government, equal to that as guns. They said that men are financially and economically stronger and hence women should have guns. Whereas this is absolutely irrelevant and absolutely irrelevant reason for why the women should be given guns, hence irrelevant in this debate. The other side had told us that the black market's value will increase, whereas we had already said that much less people will buy from the black markets, and even if it does increase, this will be much better than just handing possible criminals guns legally, which through which many people may be killed and the crime in the city may increase. Now, they also said that men will start hating more to the women, whereas they will actually be expressing their fear instead of anger, because they never know what can happen, as they will have no sorts of means for self-defense, as they will not be given the guns for self-defense, but instead will be given pepper spray. They mentioned that women will be more responsible with guns. However, they did not give us any evidence or whatsoever to prove that they will be more responsible. They spoke about how the gang violence will decrease. The gang violence will decrease. However, they did not realize that they did not take into consideration that there are also gangs with women in it, with not just men. They never realized that if you are giving these gangs with women in it guns legally, then this may as well increase. They said that on our side, all people will have guns and will be given the right to bear arms. However, they clearly did not listen to our stance, which is quite the opposite. We stated that no people will be given the guns and will not be allowed to bear arms. They said that their model will lead to more equality, and that women will be as strong as men, and said that men will be given pepper spray. However, which clearly states that they think that pepper spray is equal to bullets being shot at you at a very fast rate, and saying that this will lead to equality. Whereas our side is saying that no people will get guns, which will lead to much less gun violence. They said that their stakeholders will be the men. And yes, we totally agree, they are the men, as they will have nothing to defend themselves with against the guns, but the pepper spray. Now, thank you. Our side has spoken about how no one will feel safe if only women are allowed to own guns, even with the background checks. a- as they never know if they will become a criminal in the future. We have spoken about how guns get stolen and can be used to commit crimes. We have also talked about how, considering self-defense laws, a woman can get away with shooting someone under the pretext of self-defense, even if it was not. Also, a lot of women are insecure because they feel that they will be
Right?
attacked. No, thank you. They will be attacked. If they get to use a gun, they can shoot anyone with no repercussion, and can state their reason as self-defense simply. Whereas if a man were to use pepper spray, then or to use pepper spray, then it would not be taken into consideration at all. And with all these points, I strongly believe that the motion is in our favor.
Point?
I think the speech has ended.
Oh,
All right, cool.
my bad.
So,